So how did life and matter start, and what initiated it? Why did it occur at that time? This section gets to the heart of the debate. Both Isaac and Leonard provide explanations for how mass, and therefore space, time, and energy, could have originated given their respective positions. Leonard? Well, there are several theories on the events and states that gave rise to the universe as we experience it today. It is not necessarily the case that physics broke down. I will come onto the common models for what preceded time in just a moment, but I just wanted to address your comments on the limitations of knowledge for just a moment. Whilst I am sure there are scientists that agree with you and believe science begins at the very beginning of time, many would feel your attitude is a little defeatist. There is much we have discovered, particularly in the last 2 decades. Much of the technology these discoveries have enabled would have been far-fetched fantasies to those of past generations. We will transition to this topic later, but when I observe the workings of this universe, I struggle to justify the need for a God to intervene or contribute to a self-sufficient and sustaining system. I also feel, given the vastness of the universe and potentially parallel universes, we are quite insignificant and most likely just a probabilistically unlikely accident. As we know, the universe began from a large energy event as the universe is expanding, which suggests it was a random and unguided evolution of the universe. Isaac, looking forward to discussing the various models. The situation of what happened before time began. We can get into that in a moment. On the subject of technology and scientific developments over the last century, not being envisaged during earlier times, that is not analogous to this discussion. Recent scientific development is still predicated on the scientific principles applicable and observed within the 4 dimensions of this universe. Future potential discoveries will be a development or even be constrained by the laws of motion, laws of thermodynamics, study of energy, heat, and their transformations in physical systems. Quantum field theory treats particles as excited states of underlying fields, explaining fundamental forces and particle interactions, and the Standard Model, a theory that describes the fundamental particles that make up the universe and forces that exist between them. There is no way we can extend the scientific establishment we are acquainted with to a scenario where each aspect of it has broken down. Solving problems for which there are no space or time dimensions is intangible and most likely incomprehensible to the human psyche. To me, the fact the universe is self-sustaining is just evidence of a very intelligent and optimal design. Just further substantiates the case for God. Intervention by the Creator is only required when the systems of the universe that are visible to us appear to be temporarily violated, which is most likely what a miracle is. I am well aware of the common argument made by atheists challenging the notion one can intervene in a random process and then maintain it is still random without initiating a disruption in how the universe operates. I would argue we only refer to behavior as being random because it is too difficult to track the motion and energy state of discrete particles. With sufficient computation, one could calculate the trajectory of each particle, knowing the instantaneous momentum, relative position of surrounding particles, energy exchange upon collision and enthalpy state. Questioning why God would bring the universe into being as a result of the Big Bang process, and not just create the universe instantly as an all-powerful being, or how we can claim to be significant in such a vast universe or universes, is extremely fallacious. As we are trying to impose the logic and approach of a very limited human being to an eternal and omnipotent being existing outside space and time, it could be such a creator could have a different criteria of significance and not judge our importance based on the fraction of the total space we occupy in the universe. It could be such a creator is very attentive to our behavior. If our creator wanted us to use our faculty and logic to find the creator, he would leave signs. Discovering the Big Bang could be a method of acknowledging a single and absolute beginning of space and time, the origin of which is outside these dimensions. Many religions believe other life forms that are not carbon and water-based exist in the universe. This hypothesis cannot be disproven by analysing gas composition, presence of 22, water, or detecting radiation on other planets. Aside from this, the apparent insignificance of our presence in such a large universe could just be the Creator's way of allowing us to appreciate the magnificence and relative difference in scale between us and the Creator. Leonard, most likely a philosophical topic, so we don't need to dwell on it too much, but it seems you are suggesting God is testing us by claiming there are signs in our surrounding that point towards His existence. I assume this is where the intelligent design argument comes in, but on a general point of recognizing God, all religions consist of consequences as a result of our actions in this universe. The Abrahamic religions believe in a day of judgment, and there are other religions that believe one will reincarnate as a superior or inferior being depending on their conduct. I struggle with this. How can we have free will, but God is still aware of our final retribution or reward? Isaac: yes, God is testing us, and there has to be a just and fair consequence of our actions in the hereafter. God has given us free will. He does guide us, but is also aware of our conclusions simultaneously. I really do not see why this is a difficult concept to grasp. God exists outside space and time. He is able to simultaneously see space, time, and all other dimensions that may be beyond our comprehension, such as dimensions that may relate quantum physics to general relativity or gravity, to put is simply. Just as we can see all three spatial dimensions of a three-dimensional shape from an isometric projection, He can see the 23 entire time dimension, so can see our entire existence in one glance. Leonard, I think the point about God being able to see the entire time dimension is fair. However, I feel if we begin to raise subsequent questions on the why and how of God, we may digress from our scientific remit. Let's proceed to discuss models for the beginning of the universe. You may remember I mentioned it is not necessarily the case the universe began from a singularity. Stephen Hawking made a novel postulation in his book, A Brief History of Time, beginning with Feynman theorizing that the state of a particle at any given time is a summation of the historical events that relate to it. To put it another way, the amplitude of a quantum event will be a cumulative superposition of the previous amplitudes that relate to it. In all cases, there are several evolutionary pathways that can lead to the creation of a particle. So, it is for scientists to probabilistically deduce the most likely pathway. When Feynman is applied to the quantum theory of gravity, which is the main theory we utilize to relate quantum mechanics to general relativity, imaginary time, concept in theoretical physics that involves treating time as a complex number rather than a real number, is used for mathematical convenience, which can facilitate the assumption of Euclidean spacetime, mathematical framework in which time is treated as a spatial dimension, another mathematical convenience. The probabilistic calculation provides various possibilities for the initial state of the universe. Hence, using imaginary time, a new possibility is found, known as the no-boundary condition of the universe. In summary, this suggests the universe does expand and expand exponentially during the inflationary period. At some point, the repulsion force and kinetic energy will be lower than the negative gravitational energy, and the universe will begin to contract. According to this theory, the universe would not contract to a singularity, but to a reduced critical volume for which physics as we know it still holds, following which it would expand again as the positive energy of mass density becomes greater than the negative energy of gravity. This is a model that makes God redundant, as it is fully self-sustaining and has no time boundary. We also do not need to get into the puzzle of how time was initiated, as it claims there was never a point when we transitioned from an effective nothing to the presence of mass and energy. Isaac, I have read Stephen Hawking's book and am familiar with this theory. I am actually very surprised you started with this one, as Hawking himself mentions in his book the theory is just a proposal that is difficult to prove by experiment. We also do not yet have a robust theory that relates general relativity to quantum physics. Crucially, this theory hinges on a Euclidean transformation assuming negative time in order to remove singularities. We do not know what negative time is in terms of physics we can comprehend. As you mention, it was used for mathematical convenience. It is a mathematical construct with no meaning we can relate to. It allows us to remove singularities from the birth of the universe. But the fact is, we do observe singularities in the universe. So I struggle to justify a negative time approach. As many physicists have conceded, a mathematical model is just a way of characterizing what we observe, relating our assumed inputs to the observed outputs. The mathematical formulation has no real scientific meaning. Neither can its terms relate to our scientific intuition. Aside from the mathematics, this proposal does not withstand epistemological scrutiny. If mass contracts to a state for which the laws of physics are still valid, then space and time must still exist, be it extremely curved. For a domain within which physics is never violated, mass and energy must be conserved. They cannot always have been there, because there is no scientific law which allows them to appear from nothing in the first instance. Coupled to this is how the laws of physics that govern behavior of mass and energy, laws that are extremely complex yet still coherent, came into existence. The laws themselves are contingent upon an initial actor. Motion is a result of force being acted on an object. Heat can transfer only if there is a thermal gradient and medium present, and energy can only be converted if mass or an energy state exist in the first place. By their very nature, they could not have been part of a cyclic, self-creating process that was ever present. Leonard, I think the discussion on mass existing because of laws, or laws existing because of mass and energy, is one that is philosophical. I am just suggesting an alternative to them appearing from a quantum field by accident, or being introduced by an external agency, is to just accept they were always there. If you take objection with the boundary of the universe being one which does not violate the laws of physics, and you do not want to indulge in what nothing looked like before the Big Bang, Roger Penrose suggests a cyclic universe theory which includes the Big Bang explained in his book, What Came Before the Big Bang? Cycles of Time. It has had its fair share of criticism, but does have a complete set of mathematics to support it. It is a rather complex model, but from my understanding, Roger suggests the universe will expand and cool to a very low state of energy and density, at which point the many black holes will begin to consume the galaxies surrounding it. After some time, the black hole itself will evaporate by Hawking radiation. The mass of the black holes and what were galaxies becomes just photons. Being massless, relative size becomes irrelevant for photons as they travel to infinity. Photons also travel at the speed of light, which means time would dilate so much it no longer exists for them. If time does not exist, then neither does the concept of infinity. Infinity now has a boundary for photons at that moment. Now that space and time are non-existent behind this boundary, the state becomes very similar to what may exist prior to the Big Bang. Conformal shape theory is a mathematical projection that allows for geometric objects or space-time to change size as long as the shape is preserved. With photons being massless and independent of size, conformal shape theory allows them to be effectively compressed, so it is this state similar to a singularity, as long as the light cone shape that captures the trajectory of the photon is preserved. Assuming the shape remains constant, the universe can then be stretched by conformal theory by the other side of the boundary to create the Big Bang. Remote future is indistinguishable from Big Bang, or the Big Bang is just the remote future of previous eon, a complete cycle of the universe, beginning with a Big Bang and expanding over billions of years until it reaches a cold, empty state. Instead of ending there, this state transitions into a new Big Bang, beginning the next aeon in an endless series of cosmic cycles. As the Big Bang is high energy and hot particles travelling at speed of light. This conformal scaling then allows for a continuous and cycling universe that does not require a creator. Maxwell's equations for moving of light are conformally invariant, so they hold their form and are applicable even if you compress or expand space-time, as long as the shape of the light path is preserved. However, as the universe creates massive bodies, they act as clocks as mass and energy is interchangeable according to relativity, and energy can be related to a frequency by Planck's constant. Frequency is a time-dependent property. Thus, a time dimension comes into existence. It is Maxwell's theory that forms the foundation for Penrose's thought. Isaac: please tell me you are not seriously advocating this theory. As discussed earlier, this is a perfect example of a purely mathematical construct that has absolutely no physical relevance or applicability. The idea of infinity having a boundary because time disappears can only happen in the mathematical paradigm. Mathematicians often use infinity as it allows functions to asymptotically converge to a constant value, or because dividing a number by it gives 0. It is used for mathematical convenience. A physical infinity is far more difficult to use. Even if a photon sees a boundary as its infinity, it is moving through that boundary according to this model. The boundary is detectable in the cosmic microwave background of the next aeon as gravitational waves. Gravitational ripples created by gravitational bodies moving relative to one another, created by merged black holes of the previous aeon. This transition from one aeon to the other means the boundary could not have been infinite by physical definition. To put it simply, a particle moving through infinity stays within its given domain it cannot transition. Secondly, the application of conformal scaling. What allows for this is that Maxwell's equations allow electromagnetic energy, or photons, to travel to infinity without a size dependence. You are basically saying, because photons are the only particle that have survived, they have no mass, and time does not exist for them, I have most of what I require to form a universe. The only thing that remains is that I need to go from a highly compact state to an inflated one in order to create a Big Bang. Photons exist on both sides of the boundary, so I can apply Maxwell's equations, which are not concerned with size-only shape, and conveniently compress the remote end of the previous aeon and expand the beginning of the next aeon. Apologies. This is a loophole that mathematics has allowed and again cannot be predicated on real physics. In the real world, mass or particles do not compress and heat up or expand and cool down because the mathematics is indifferent. Density changes because the temperature and thus the kinetic energy of the particles has changed, or an external pressure does work on the volume. Just to finish on this, postulating a cyclic mechanism does not allow you to evade the fundamental obstacle all atheist cosmology theories face. In this case, how a photon, an intelligent particle, in the sense it obeys laws and consistent behavior, came into being to allow this cycle to ensue. I know this is not a mainstream opinion. Most likely you were just positing it for awareness rather than supporting it. Would you like to discuss the more popular quantum field theory cosmology argument? Leonard: thank you, Isaac. You are correct. I did just mention it for information. It is not a theory which I wholeheartedly support now, but it does offer a novel perspective and may give rise to other theories that are cyclic in nature and appeal to our physical observations a little more. So, I am not prepared to completely jettison the model just yet. You are also correct in presuming the theory I am currently most convinced of is one that suggests prior to the universe all that existed was quantum fields, that like our universe had a total energy of 0. I just quickly wanted to address your point on the model requiring an initial photon. The point of this model is that it is a perpetual series of events and can continue for an infinite amount of time, so the event precursor becomes irrelevant. Isaac: a photon is so complex it has wave-particle duality, behaves like a wave and particle. Its symmetric behavior can be mathematically characterized. It required the annihilation of other elementary particle to create it, and it can undergo pair production to decay to a positron and electron, both of which have mass. It is a very intelligent particle, and not one that could have come from nothing to create this cycle that has always been there. Leonard: I personally have no problem accepting some things have had an infinite existence. Isaac: by that virtue, you should have no problem accepting God. A far better explanation than the mathematical gymnastics that is required to arrive at an irrational conclusion just to avoid a creator. Leonard: Are you aware the sum of infinity has an absolute value of 1.12? It is something real that we can legitimately base theories on. Isaac, that is incredibly disingenuous and mathematical trickery. The Ramanujan summation was never intended to prove infinity has a value. Rather, it was an extension of what is called the Riemann zeta function. This is a mathematical manipulation in which the infinite series have parts of it isolated and the remainder represented in algebraic form. By the summation of divergent series in various forms, one is able to reach the number 1.12. This does not represent a diverging series in which natural numbers are continuously incrementing, the real definition of infinity. As a simple analogy, it is like me asking you to think of a number, multiply it by 2, add 8, divide by 2, take away the number you originally thought of, then amazing you by telling you your answer will always be 4. Leonard, I am not avoiding the possibility of a creator. As mentioned earlier, I am open to a type of creator if I could obtain empirical evidence of his existence. Isaac, well, you have little to no evidence to support all the atheist theories that attempt to explain what existed before the universe and what happened to initiate the Big Bang. Evidence does exist for God's existence, but not as signals from God coming from the universe boundary as you want. Rather, God has provided signs of his design and contingency for those that want to find them. Leonard, why should I have to look for signs? Why should I be tested? Isaac, again, you are trying to understand the logic of a higher power, limitless in his power, and not constrained by space and time. As discussed earlier, by every logic this is a human limitation. We must make a case for or against God based on what can be observed, measured, or inferred. Leonard, based on what I have observed and understood, I believe the universe began from quantum fields. I am happy to stay with that for now. Isaac, excellent. Let's begin. I already have a good appreciation of why you emphasized total energy for the universe being 0. Leonard, before there was anything, before the universe, or anything for that matter, there were quantum fields. These fields would have existed before the universe because they can appear even if you have no absolute mass and energy. There are several of these fields in the Standard Model, the foundational model of quantum physics that describes fundamental particles and the forces that exist with the exception of gravity. Some examples of quantum fields include the Higgs field, which allows particles to have mass, the Higgs boson particle, which is essentially a wave in this field, imparts mass characteristics into the particle that interacts with it. Similarly, there is also the electromagnetic field, which allows for photons, energy-carrying particles, to travel with both particle and wave-like characteristics. Again, because these fields are ubiquitous and seem to be independent of the absolute presence of mass, energy, and therefore space, it must have always existed. A quantum field existed outside space and time as we see it. The field is in constant perturbation. This is permitted by the Heisenberg principle. States the position and velocity can never be known with absolute accuracy, thus permitting a margin of uncertainty variance. Each energy state peak in the field represents positive energy, or mass, and each trough is negative energy, annihilation of the particle, with the net energy across the field equaling 0. So energetic particles are coming in and out of existence by borrowing energy from the cosmos. It is entirely possible, but infrequent, that an event occurs which involves a given wave of this field having such a large amplitude that a large amount of mass and energy is created. This is called quantum tunneling, when a zero-dimensional domain exceeds the energy barrier required to create dimensions. This high-density mass then expands, creating time and space. Energy is still conserved in this new domain as the positive energy of mass is cancelled by the negative gravitational energy. Isaac, right. It looks like this is your main thesis, and possibly the most credible one. Let's dissect and address each part of this argument. Firstly, I would like to help us jettison this absurd notion of the elimination of energy by net equal amounts of positive and negative energy, negating the need for a creator. Just because the net effect of two contributors is zero does not mean the two contributors do not exist and act in isolation. A ball is only stationary when being held in your hand because you are exerting a force that is equal to the weight of the ball. The ball is not moving, but that does not mean you and gravity are not performing an action. As you are well aware, quantum field theory comes from the second quantization, which describes how waves can behave like particles. It also allows us to combine special relativity with quantum mechanics. The first quantization is better known as it relates to the Schrödinger concept of particle acting as waves. Quantum fields are modeled using Floch spaces, which are extensions of Hilbert spaces. For simplicity, let's just stay with Hilbert spaces in the case of second quantization, abstract spaces that describe quantum state. Hilbert for single system particle, and Floch for a system of variable particles. Hilbert spaces allow for vectors to exist within an infinite number of non-spatial dimensions, but only for a single particle. If we take a spatial vector such as velocity, the length of the vector will define its speed, and its direction determines its relationship with the three spatial components. Similarly, a Hilbert space consists of vector-like elements that act as functions relating to an infinite number of components. These eigenvectors are often called eigenstates as they define the state of a particle. Although these eigenstates are well defined, the system actually comprises of a superposition of states. It then becomes probabilistic as to which state the system identifies as when measured, also known as the eigenvalue. The main basis of mass coming from the atheist version of nothing, a nothing which in reality is a quantum field, is the Schwinger effect. The Schwinger effect suggests if the virtual particles that make up the quantum field exceed the threshold energy of 2mc2, energy supplied due to the presence of an electric field, it will create an electron-positron pair. Leonard, you have just provided some background on my position. As much as I appreciate the physics lesson, what is your opinion on it? Isaac, there were several details you had missed out when describing how the universe could have originated from quantum fields. It was important I brought these points to the discussion for me to build my argument. It also counters the common misconception that theists are not scientific. Our justification for a creator can be underpinned with science. Leonard, please present your rebuttal. Isaac, my rebuttal is quite simple. All you have done is create a new set of dimensions and a new space that are mathematical abstracts, dimensions and spaces unlike what we recognize. You use these virtual spaces to allocate properties to our space and time, or create a bridge between abstract dimensions of a pre-existing quantum field to the four dimensions we recognize. Nevertheless, they are spaces that allow for vectors or states to be defined using mathematical functions. The fact that you can characterize the state behavior mathematically suggests a consistent mechanism, in other words, a design or laws. A ubiquitous mechanism could not exist from randomness, and it does not reflect nothingness. The Schwinger effect firstly requires an initiation from an electric field or EM wave, so could not occur without agency. Secondly, there is a consistent mechanism for converting a virtual particle into mass, the energy threshold that needs to be met in order for the transition to take place. Again, necessitating a mechanism, laws, logic and design. Although conventional time does not exist for quantum fields, an analogous time is implicit in the mathematics. When analysing varying permutations of quantum states, each combination has to be associated with an implicit timestamp, iteration number, or permutation identifier. It would require something similar to time for a system to cycle through the various state permutations. The claim that the creation of the universe is a stochastic event in the continuous creation and annihilation, taking course in the quantum field, indicates an implicit time, as universes are not being created all the time, but a specific event, created by specific virtual particles at a specific moment in implicit time. Your other claim of net energy equating to zero will require an integral of positive and negative states over the abstract space for each permutation to prove that is the case. This is why emergent time, time that is created due to the interaction of particles, is often suggested for quantum fields. So, you see, you have just replaced our dimensions with a new set of dimensions acting within, which is a quantum field, which you are attempting to explain using science. And you claim the field has the ability to create mass and energy. Hardly sounds like a nothing. Lastly, when the quantum field experienced an amplitude large enough to create a universe, conservation of positive and negative energy is not conserved. The common argument made is that it happens so fast that conservation becomes irrelevant. Once again, a rapid speed of a process infers time. Leonard, a space that has nothing is a subjective concept. We know electromagnetic waves can travel through a vacuum, whilst being accompanied by self-sustaining and oscillating magnetic and electric fields. Similarly, the Higgs field is ubiquitous and will only give a particle mass property once it interacts with the field, but the field itself can exist in a vacuum. We do not have to comply with your definition of nothingness. It does not have to be the absence of every single known entity. Fields can be part of nothingness. Creationists have this habit of being dogmatic with absolute nothingness. We are far more nuanced and open to a more complex minima, a minima that does not require a creator. Isaac, this is normally the point where so-called scientific atheists try to blind others with science which even they cannot grasp, hoping their convenient adjusting of definitions and goalposts goes unnoticed, not realizing that many of the pioneers of science were devout believers in God. Well, you won't be able to pull the wool over my eyes. Firstly, both of the examples you mentioned exist in space and time that we perceive, irrespective of space being a vacuum. The Higgs field is only realized when a particle interacts with it. Otherwise, it has little to contribute in isolation. Again, when particles interact with it, its behavior is consistent and has a predefined mechanism of enabling mass. Maxwell's equation does describe how an EM wave can propagate through a vacuum. You are correct. However, a charged particle has to be moving or accelerating in the first instance to emit an EM wave, as well as creating a magnetic field alongside its electric field. The accelerating particle disturbs the electric and magnetic field, creating a ripple effect, allowing a photon quanta to travel through a vacuum. The space itself also needs to have known physical properties, permittivity, permeability, and conductivity, to allow magnetic and electric fields to propagate. These values are roughly constant within a vacuum. Conductivity is zero. I really struggle to understand how you can justify a field with consistent physical properties, consistent mechanism of interaction with external particles, and the field characteristics itself is the result of charged particles moving as being intrinsic to nothing. Regarding this principle of particles appearing and disappearing from allegedly nothing without violating conservation laws as long as it disappears within the uncertainty timeframe, Lawrence Krauss posits two examples in his book, A Universe from Nothing. The first example is that of two charged plates being brought closer together. In the middle will be an interaction of their respective electric fields. In quantum electrodynamics, the quantum theory of electromagnetism, this electric field is explained as a result of virtual photons. Because these virtual photons are a result of static charge, they have no energy and so can travel large distances without depleting energy. As the plates come together, the energy density of the field could become so high that a virtual particle is converted into a physical one, electron and positron. In the second example, he cites Stephen Hawking's discovery that it may be possible for black holes to radiate particles. The region of a black hole, inside which nothing can escape unless it can travel faster than the speed of light, is called the event horizon. If a particle and antiparticle is created just outside the event horizon due to a quantum fluctuation, and one of the particles falls into the black hole, depending on the gravitational force within the black hole and the distance it falls, the particle could lose so much gravitational energy that it exceeds the rest mass energy of both particles. This then provides surplus energy for the partner particle residing outside the event horizon to escape, thus black hole radiation. But in both examples, a field with defined laws and behaviors, ability to create mass and energy whilst residing in our universal dimensions existed to allow the creation of particles. In fact, the fields themselves are described as virtual particles. By no sensible definition can such fields be defined as a nothing. The uncertainty principle, which is what permits field theories, is still in part problematic, as it could be challenged a violation of energy should never be granted irrespective of time step. Also, if virtual particles are not real particles, how is it that they can borrow energy to create real particles? Leonard, so much design and intention, yet we know there will be a big crunch that will bring us back to a singularity again. Isaac, these are speculative theories that you are using to get yourself out of a ditch. Stick to mainstream theories. However, even the big crunch is based on laws of physics, and it still doesn't get you out of the quagmire of the origin of mass and energy, even if we return to a space-time singularity. When will atheists just accept we are at the limits of human comprehension when trying to explore what happened before the Big Bang, which is why you have to rely on mathematics that characterizes some directional experimental finding at best, or a major extrapolation from a behavior that can be observed, as direct physical theory cannot be developed. You then try to provide far-fetched and unconvincing explanations of the mathematics. I stress again, often the mathematics you develop is evidently dubious because scientists themselves struggle to associate physical meanings to them. A mathematical function can be developed to describe a specific aspect of physics. It may be a good fit for that behavior, but that solely does not permit the functional to be so universal it can be coupled, developed further, or extrapolated to understand other aspects. Its applicability may be specific to a given behavior or experiment, with predicted outputs correlating with measurement for given input parameters. It is virtually impossible for you to escape contingency of mass, energy, or particles, but you continue to create new versions of nothing that can bring about something. The very truth is that you do not want to submit yourself to your creator out of arrogance. You need to humble yourself. There is far more that we don't know, and much which understanding is beyond our faculty. Examples of this include the wave function collapsing to a particle-like property as a result of measurement, or using string theory to introduce several additional dimensions to help explain gravity. Leonard, we understand much of what we propose is difficult to comprehend and can really only be rationalized in the mathematical context. We often try to provide physical explanations to mathematical models, but I feel this normally causes further confusion. Such models should remain as mathematical theories. Having said this, we acknowledge that we are most likely at the limits of human capability when trying to extrapolate common science to answer the bigger questions of our origins and purpose. But we are trying our best to answer questions using the tools we have available. The absence of a firm theoretical explanation that is universally accepted does not necessitate God. Anyhow, I feel we are possibly going about this discussion the wrong way. The reason why we are looking for mechanisms that allow something to come from nothing is because we do not see a need for a creator in our observable universe. It is entirely possible this coherent and functioning universe that envelops us is the result of many random events. The universe is the probabilistic product of one of many possibilities. This is the main reason why I do not believe in God. Field theory origins are just an extension of this thought. Isaac, that is not very academic. For somebody that claims he bases all his views on logic and science, you are basically suggesting that you see immense complexity around you, but you're going to assume it was all an accident. Moreover, because you have made this bold leap, you will try to create a theory for the origin of mass to give your presupposed theory credence. Okay, fine. Let's get into why you feel it's all one big accident. So how did the universe begin? And talk me through the stages from its birth to its form today. Leonard, regardless of what existed prior to the birth of the universe, and whether it was a singularity or not, it is almost undeniable. The universe was the result of an explosion or rapid energy and mass release at its inception. Isaac, agreed. Not necessarily an uncontrolled and stochastic heat and mass release, though. Leonard, there is a lot of evidence the Big Bang could not have been orchestrated. Isaac, really, I would be very keen to learn of all this evidence. From my research, even atheists accept there is a compelling case for intelligent design based on observations. However, as with most arguments for design, atheists counter with the notion that the apparent design is just a possibility out of many that could have occurred, and given enough time, a finely tuned design can be achieved. Absolutely absurd. No aspect of life demonstrates such behavior. Nowhere in the behavior of the universe do we observe order, design, and purpose come out of complete disorder. In fact, laws such as the second law of thermodynamics demand that entropy will increase with time for a closed system. Leonard, if you allow me to complete my point without interjecting, perhaps I can help you understand why this universe came about by chance. I am sure you have come across the famous diagram consisting of concentric circles, each representing various phases of the Big Bang. Isaac, I am aware of the diagram you are referring to, and I have no objection to it whatsoever. In fact, I believe it to be a very plausible theory, but please describe your understanding of it, and we can identify where our opinions depart, if at all. Leonard, I am very surprised to hear that, Isaac, perhaps because by default I assume theists accept the biblical story of creation, which is incompatible with the Big Bang. I know this is not the case with you, so I guess I should not be so surprised. The Big Bang is divided into 6 phases, each identified by letter AF. Stage A is the very beginning, the ignition point if you like, often called the singularity. I am not going to call it a singularity for now, as there are models that assume an initial point of very high density, but not to such an extent that common physics becomes invalid. We know from the cosmic microwave radiation the high density point evolved into a highly thermal fireball. The fireball expands to create mass, energy, and space. At this early stage, elementary particles will be created. Matter and antimatter will collide due to high energy available to create smaller particles and photons. The early fireball would have essentially been a perfect blackbody, radiating all wavelengths, as the universe expanded and cooled, eventually creating plasma, and eventually particles we recognize today, as the rate of particle creation dominates over rate of annihilation. After what is called the Planck instant, general relativity can be used to understand gravity, with the cosmological constant representing the energy required for universal expansion. Prior to this, a type of quantum gravity must have existed, but it is very difficult for us to regress back to the very beginning, mainly because physics, as we understand it today, breaks down. The mathematical relationships which form the fabric of science provide jargon when you extrapolate to time equals 0 and below. The 4 fundamental forces of electromagnetics, weak and strong nuclear forces and gravitational force, were most likely merged and indistinguishable prior to the Planck instant. The universe goes through a number of phase change events as it cools, just like water transitioning to ice as the temperature is reduced. A key phase change period is the inflationary period, when the universe experienced a break in symmetry when the universe cooled to a state where nuclear forces were most dominant. Potential energy stored in the inflation field available, powering a rapid exponential expansion. The universe becomes uniform and isotropic during this period. Much of the symmetry we observe today was formed during the inflationary period. The cooling of the universe, and thus lower energy state, as well as particles moving further apart from one another, created a redshift to an increased wavelength. Eventually, the universe cools to a state where inflation symmetry is broken, and quarks, electrons, positrons, gluons, and photons exist in abundance. The quarks and gluons combine to create neutrons and protons, hadrons. Electrons and positrons annihilation creates neutrinos. The available particles are then used to create hydrogen. The nucleosynthesis, of which fusion may be one, subsequently creates helium, deuterium, and lithium. Isaac, this is all fine, and I generally agree. But why can this all not be orchestrated by a deity? Leonard, the theistic narrative becomes unstuck during the inflation phase. We know from the Boomerang experiment observations in 2000 that universe is flat. Without delving into the mathematics, we know from the Friedman calculation, equations that model the expansion of the universe, a flat universe can only be possible if most of the energy is stored in the empty space. This energy is called dark energy in the present day and represents an anti-gravity force, similar to the cosmological constant. It is this energy that is currently causing expansion of the universe. Potential energy also resides in empty space during the inflationary period. This energy slow rolls its potential downwards during the inflationary period. Inflation will stretch and homogenize the space. This residual energy will stretch density fluctuations to macroscale and eventually mass objects as we observe them. A characteristic of a flat universe is that the net energy is zero. The gravitational energy is equal to matter energy. So, we have a universe that requires no injection of energy, as the net energy is zero. Objects will be created as a result of inflation, all occurring without the need of any deity. Quantum fluctuations that always existed in empty space interact with potential energy from inflation to become larger density fluctuations and thus mass. The expansion will decelerate once the energy from the fireball has been converted to mass and energy within resulting universe. Isaac, you have spoken at length. Let me respond to the arguments you have presented so far. I know what is coming next. You will jettison the concept of natural laws, claiming they are a stochastic result of multiple universes bubbling out of inflation, and that we have our native laws purely by fortune. Leonard, thank you for that point, and the laws of physics being a random possibility was the argument I was going to develop. So well done. I assume you are going to tell me how God fills all the gaps in my chronology of events. Isaac, glad you brought that up. I often hear atheists mention this God of the gaps phrase. I think I can address this misconception as part of my rebuttal. I believe this argument is far more applicable to atheists than creationists. A real scientist, in fact, any logical person should devoid themselves of any bias or presupposition before an experiment is complete or prior to all evidence being presented. They should then review the data and arrive at a conclusion which is underpinned with evidence. Let's review if that is what you have done. Firstly, you claim before the universe there was nothing, no space or time. Yet there was something because quantum fields constantly in flux existed and obeyed unknown but consistent laws. There was no space, but yet a field with oscillations or irregularities existed. A specific fluctuation at a specific moment penetrated the fabric of space and time to create mass and energy, yet there was no time. You do not have a firm grasp of the causal mechanism or the initial state, but yet have accepted this theory as a basis. We have discussed that before, so won't labour the point of these theories being only in the mathematical context without any physical relatability. So, we have somehow created this highly dense singularity. The concept of particles cannot be applied as it is completely uniform with no concept of micro-discontinuities. Space and time do not exist. Yet it does possess some level of law as the high density was causing it to be extremely hot. Similar to what we experience in laboratories, the temperature of a fixed mass of gas will increase if it is compressed to a higher density. However, the concept of particle excitation or nuclear fusion is immaterial, as again, there is no concept of particles as we perceive them. This hot fireball then begins to expand for unknown reasons. So already the concept as well as laws of energy conversion, energy conservation and quantum interactions exist. Then suddenly this expanding space goes through a runaway process called inflation. Once again, we don't know what triggered inflation. As before, there is already a law in place to conserve energy and a mechanism to transfer it, as energy is being transferred to empty space. After a Planck period, gravity also begins to exist, and expansion decelerates. Because you need something to counteract the gravity and sustain the expansion, dark energy has to be introduced. You have no understanding of the nature of this dark energy or where it comes from. All you can say is that it is an intrinsic part of space, and it is created as the universe expands and creates more empty space. Accepting a constant density energy that is created just because you are expanding a volume is difficult to fathom. As if it was part of the volume material, it should reduce in density with increasing volume. Surely accepting an intelligent creator given the ingenious system we live in has to be easier than accepting a quantity with no basis. Standard cosmological models assume the universe does not have an outer boundary or a volume, despite it expanding, and reference points moving further apart, reducing in dark matter density and creating more empty space. There are various explanations for this, but none of them are palatable to our intuition and what we observe. Yet you are happy to accept this because it facilitates the mathematics of standard models. I emphasize, it escapes me how you are able to accept such abstract concepts, yet accepting intelligent design despite so much evidence is a real struggle. Getting back to early expansion of the universe, laws conveniently exist that allow for a phase change to occur subsequent to inflation as the universe cools, causing energy to be converted to elementary particles. These particles collide to create subparticles and radiation. Weak, strong, and electromagnetic forces exist between these particles to eventually create the atom. In addition, there is dark matter, which makes up most of the matter in our universe. But yet, you have no explanation for how dark matter was created, or its nature. You claim, all these laws were either always there, or we got them by chance. We just happened to be in the correct bubble. As you are well aware, there are several gaps in the cosmological argument. Admittedly, these are gaps that are accepted by atheists. Throughout your argument, you have accepted an external entity with existing properties is necessary, but you have termed it nothingness. Or you have accepted abstract concepts that are seemingly in opposition to science as we understand it, but you are happy to accept it, as it justifies unfounded terms or assumptions required in the mathematical models of 50. Cosmology. It is not a far departure to accept this external entity has intellect. We both agree the need for external influence outside our time and space domain in order to initiate mass and energy. We also agree symmetric laws need to pre-exist to create and guide both of these properties. We are also accepting we are at the limits of our knowledge when trying to understand the early universe or what there was before. We have already established we have to make various compromises to common science in order to support models. In which context, surely, it is a more scientific arrival is to accept external agency. Based on the evidence, it is far less academic to try to justify there is nothing that is actually something outside of space and time. All the laws and systems we have are a stochastic fortune out of numerous useless possibilities, for which, I might add, you don't have a shred of evidence. The truth is, you have already accepted you do not want to accept a God, and so you have to be academically deceptive and use mathematical sleight of hand to attribute obvious actions of an intelligent being to a nothingness that is actually something. Leonard, we are not being deceptive. We are using scientific and mathematical tools that have been developed and stood the test of time. Isaac, Leonard, not once did I claim methodologies that appeal to human logic should not be used. In fact, it is the scientific approach that led me to God. Leonard, I know it is where our understanding breaks down or is limited as to where you are directing your challenge, to which my answer is quite simply that I have never seen God and have not seen any evidence of his existence. As an academic, I cannot accept an explanation without evidence. Isaac. But even the original quantum fields and dark energy, as well as multiverses, have no evidence supporting them. You have created a deity without realizing it. You have characterized this deity using pseudo-logic that you can relate to based on theory developed for behavior within our universe. But this is flawed, as the nature of forces outside space and time must be unlike and unrelatable to anything within it. For me, God is this external force which cannot be fully comprehended, depicted, or described. God does not have to reveal himself to you. That is what you feel he must do. In most religions, the onus is on you to contemplate on existence and surroundings to find God. Leonard, you interrupted me halfway through me making my case. We need to discuss how the universe evolves to fully appreciate why I feel this universe is just an improbable fortune rather than intelligent design. So I'll resume building my argument. Isaac, I think at this stage it is also worth mentioning how the rate of particle creation is fine-tuned such that it is slightly higher than the rate of annihilation, so that the net result is mass creation. Crucially for survival, the universe is also expanding at the exact rate which allows it to maintain a critical density. If the density was any higher, the universe would just crunch due to gravity, and any lower, and the universe would become extremely cold and dark, inhibiting it from sustaining life. Of course, this was only possible because the universe was made isotropic, uniform in all directions, by inflation, which occurred for some unknown reason completely by accident, according to you. Leonard, the fine-tuning argument is a compelling one, and one that theists hold on to tightly. But as you are about to learn, much of the universe does not seem to have a purpose, and therefore does appear to have constructed itself by a random set of events. Isaac, let's be clear. These random events don't just include the universe is perfectly expanding at the critical velocity. Also, the smaller contribution of radiation to density reduces due to redshift as the universe expands. The Hubble number, a dimensionless number used to calculate relative velocity between galaxies, changes with time. Therefore, the critical density must also change to balance the gravitational force with differing expansion. The universe must have mechanisms in place to always regulate and achieve this density. Leonard, again, Isaac, I have no problem accepting a series of probabilistically unlikely but possible events occurred to achieve the critical density. From detecting the microwave background, the abundance of helium, deuterium, and other isotopes, we have built models that allow us to predict the subatomic and atomic events that took place just after the birth of the universe. We see no logic or design in the stages. They seem to be completely stochastic. Events are as follows. The early stage of the Big Bang creates a high density of gamma radiation. This breaks any atoms that may be present into elementary particles, electrons, protons, helium nuclei, neutrons, positrons, and neutrinos, as well as their respective antiparticles. Many of these particles are also unstable, and the heavier ones decay. Thus, the proton-to-neutron ratio varies as the universe cools. Eventually, the universe will cool to allow sufficient stability to create simple nuclei such as that of helium and deuterium. Initially, a proton and neutron combine to form deuterium, and then deuterium nuclei combine to form helium. So we have now formed the first atoms as we understand them today. Although it took place much before the creation of the first atom, it was the inflationary period that laid the foundations for mass creation. We have already discussed this phase in some detail, and we both understand inflation makes the universe isotropic. It is powered by dark potential energy in the inflation field, and the stretch of density fluctuations give rise to further particles. Following inflation, as a phase change occurs and cosmological constant reduces. You correctly point out there is much we do not understand about dark matter or dark energy. But that does not mean we satisfy this gap in knowledge with God. Once we have mass, we also have gravity. Gravity is an imperative force. Many could argue solely responsible for the creation of celestial bodies, stars, and black holes. Like dark matter, there is much we do not understand about gravity at a quantum level, but general relativity allows us a method to model it in terms of space-time. Isaac, these "we don't know this yet" statements seem to be amounting, Leonard. You also seem to apply this statement to the key factors that form the cornerstone of your argument, and in the areas that would negate God. Poorly, may I add. There has got to be a point at which your gaps in knowledge invalidate your argument for atheism. I am sure you will counter by stating, The default substitute for inadequacies is not necessarily God, but as you will find when I make my argument, collectively all your shortfalls make God necessary, even when considering in the scientific context.